The wagon station at Miller's Crossing wasn't much. A sagging roof, 3 walls that kept out most of the wind, and a bench worn smooth by countless bodies waiting for something better. Clara sat on that bench with her spine straight and her hands folded over the envelope in her lap, looking like a woman who still believed posture mattered. It didn't, not out here. The station master, a man whose name she hadn't caught and wouldn't remember, spat tobacco juice into the dirt and eyed her with the kind of curiosity reserved for oddities. A woman alone. Good dress, though dusty. No luggage except a small carpet bag. No husband, no brother, no father in sight. "You sure someone's coming for you?" he asked for the 3rd time. "I'm sure. Because if they ain't, last stage back east leaves in 2 hours. After that, you're stuck till next week. And lady, you don't look like you're built for stuck." Clara turned her head just enough to meet his eyes. "I'll be fine." She wouldn't be fine. She knew that. But she'd learned something in the past 6 months. People stopped asking questions when you lied with enough conviction. The wind picked up, carrying the smell of pine and something sharper. Snow, maybe, though it was only October. The mountains loomed in the distance, dark and indifferent, their peaks already white. Somewhere up there, a man named Elias Crow was expecting her. A man who'd agreed to marry a woman he'd never seen, based on a letter from a minister and a promise that she could work. That was the word the minister had used. Work. Like she was livestock. Maybe she was. The envelope in her lap contained the marriage contract, drawn up by a lawyer in Philadelphia who'd smirked the entire time he explained the terms. Binding upon arrival. Consummation within 30 days to validate the union. Property rights transferred to the husband. In exchange, she would receive shelter, protection, and the legal status of a wife. Not love. The contract didn't mention love. Clara had signed it anyway because the alternative was worse. There, the station master pointed down the rutted road where a wagon had appeared, a battered thing pulled by 2 horses that looked as tired as Clara felt. The driver was a broad-shouldered silhouette against the pale sky, his face shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat. Her stomach clenched. The wagon rolled to a stop in front of the station, and the driver climbed down with the kind of economy that spoke of a man who didn't waste movement. He was tall, taller than she'd expected, and built like someone who'd spent his life wrestling the land into submission. His coat was patched at the elbows, his boots scuffed nearly smooth. He didn't look at her right away. Instead, he nodded to the station master. "Crow," the station master said, almost respectful. "Jensen." The man's voice was low, rough-edged. He turned to Clara, and for the first time she saw his face. Hard. That was the word that came to mind. Not cruel, but carved from something that didn't bend. His jaw was shadowed with stubble, his eyes pale, gray or blue, she couldn't tell in the flat light. He looked her over with the same detachment a man might show a horse at auction. "You're the woman from the letter," he said. Not a question. "I am." He waited, like he expected her to say more. When she didn't, he glanced at her carpet bag. "That all you brought?" "Yes." Something flickered across his face. Surprise, maybe, or suspicion. "You know where we're going?" "North, into the mountains. That's what the letter said." "It's 2 days' ride. Weather turns, could be 3. You up for that?" Clara stood, gripping the handle of her bag. "I didn't come this far to turn back." He studied her for a moment longer, then nodded once. "All right, get in." No introduction, no handshake, no pretense of courtesy. He simply turned and walked back to the wagon, leaving her to follow. The station master watched her with something like pity. "You sure about this, miss?" Clara looked at the mountains, then at the man waiting by the wagon. "No," she said quietly, "but I'm doing it anyway." She climbed into the wagon. Shout. The first hour passed in silence. Elias Crow drove with his attention fixed on the road, or what passed for a road. It was more of a suggestion, really, a pair of ruts that wound through scrub pine and rock, climbing steadily into the foothills. The horses plodded along with the resignation of animals who'd made this trip too many times. Clara sat beside him on the narrow bench, her hands folded in her lap, her back aching from the jolting. She wanted to ask questions. How far? How long? What kind of life she was walking into? But his silence felt deliberate, like a wall he'd built and didn't intend to tear down. So she stayed quiet and watched the land change. The trees grew taller, darker. The air turned colder. The light slanted through the branches in long, pale shafts that looked almost holy, though Clara had stopped believing in holy things around the same time she stopped believing anyone would want her. "You got a first name?" Elias asked suddenly. She startled. "Clara." "Clara," he repeated, like he was testing the weight of it. "The letter just said Miss Whitlock, and yours is Elias." "Eli. Most people call me Eli." She glanced at him. His expression hadn't changed, still that same unreadable mask. "What should I call you?" "Whatever you want." It wasn't an answer, but she didn't push. Instead, she asked, "How long have you been up here?" 8 years. "Alone?" His jaw tightened. "Mostly." She waited, but he didn't elaborate. The silence stretched out again, heavier this time, and Clara felt the first prickle of unease. She'd known this wouldn't be easy, coming west to marry a stranger, living in the mountains, rebuilding her life from nothing, but she hadn't expected this coldness, this sense that she'd walked into a place where warmth didn't exist. "Why'd you answer the letter?" she asked, and immediately regretted it. Eli's hands tightened on the reins. For a moment, she thought he wouldn't respond. Then, without looking at her, he said, "Same reason you wrote it, I expect." "And what reason is that?" He finally turned his head and his eyes met hers, flat, unreadable, and so tired she felt it in her chest. "Because I didn't have a choice." They stopped at dusk to water the horses and eat a cold meal of bread and dried meat. Eli built a small fire, though he didn't seem inclined to sit by it. Instead, he stood at the edge of the clearing, looking out at the darkening trees like he was listening for something. Clara watched him from her seat on a fallen log, the firelight casting shadows across her face. She wanted to say something, anything to break the tension, but every word that came to mind felt wrong. Finally, she tried, "Do you regret it? Sending for me?" He didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice was low. "Ask me again in a month." It should have stung. Maybe it did. But Clara was too tired to care. She pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders and stared into the fire, wondering what the hell she'd gotten herself into. Eli returned to the fire eventually, settling onto the opposite log with his rifle across his knees. He didn't look at her, didn't speak, just sat there, a sentinel in the growing dark. "Can I ask you something?" Clara said after a while. "You just did." She almost smiled. "Why do you live all the way out here? The letter said you had a homestead, but—" "Because it's mine." His voice was sharp, sudden. "Every inch of it. I cleared the land, built the cabin, dug the well. No one gave it to me. No one can take it." There was something fierce in the way he said it, something raw. Clara recognized it because she'd felt it herself, the desperate need to own something, to have something that couldn't be stripped away. "I understand," she said quietly. He looked at her then, really looked, and for the first time she saw a flicker of something other than suspicion. Curiosity, maybe, or recognition. "Do you?" he asked. "Yes." They stared at each other across the fire, two strangers bound by desperation, and Clara thought, this might work, or it might destroy us both. The cabin appeared on the second day, just as the sun was starting to sink behind the peaks. It was smaller than Clara had imagined, a single-room structure made of rough-hewn logs, with a stone chimney and a roof that looked like it had been patched more than once. A small barn stood nearby, and beyond that a pasture fenced with split rails. The land around it was wild, beautiful in a stark, unforgiving way. Eli pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the cabin and climbed down without a word. Clara followed, her legs stiff from 2 days of sitting, her heart beating faster than it should. This was it. Her new life. Her new home. She didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Eli grabbed her bag from the wagon and carried it to the door, pushing it open with his shoulder. "Come on." Inside, the cabin was sparse. A table, 2 chairs, a narrow bed in the corner, a fireplace with a pot hanging over cold ashes, shelves lined with supplies, flour, salt, a few cans. Everything practical, nothing soft. Clara stood in the doorway, taking it in, and felt something crack open inside her. Not disappointment, something deeper. The realization that this was real, that she'd actually done it. Eli set her bag down and turned to face her. "You can take the bed. I'll sleep by the fire." She blinked. "That's not—" "It's fine." "The contract says I know what the contract says. His voice was flat, but not unkind. We'll get to that when we're ready. Right now you need rest, and I need to make sure the horses are settled. Take the bed. He walked out before she could argue, leaving her alone in the dim cabin. Clara stood there for a long time, staring at the bed, the walls, the life she'd chosen. Then, slowly, she sat down on the edge of the mattress and let herself breathe. She'd made it. Against all odds, she'd made it. Now came the hard part. The first week was a careful dance of boundaries. Eli woke before dawn every day and went out to work the land, chopping wood, mending fences, checking the traps he'd set in the woods. Clara woke to the sound of the axe and busied herself with what little there was to do inside, sweeping the floor, organizing supplies, trying to make the cabin feel less like a tomb. They barely spoke. Meals were quiet, functional. Eli ate quickly and left. Clara cleaned up and sat by the fire, wondering if this silence was permanent. On the 8th day, she decided to break it. She was outside when he came back from the woods, carrying a string of rabbits. He stopped when he saw her standing by the woodpile, her sleeves rolled up, an axe in her hands. "What are you doing?" he asked. "Chopping wood." "You don't need to." "Yes, I do." She brought the axe down, splitting a log cleanly in two. "I didn't come here to sit inside and wait for you to take care of me. If this is going to work, I need to pull my weight." He set the rabbits down slowly, his expression unreadable. "You know how to use that?" "My father taught me." "Did he?" It wasn't a question, but Clara answered anyway. "Before he decided I wasn't worth teaching anymore." Eli's eyes narrowed. Why'd he decide that? She hesitated, the axe heavy in her hands. Then, because she was tired of hiding, she said, "Because a doctor told him I'd probably die if I ever had a child. And what good is a daughter who can't give you grandchildren?" The words hung in the air between them, sharp and ugly. Clara braced herself for disgust, for regret, for him to tell her this whole thing was a mistake. Instead, Eli just nodded. "That why you're here?" "Part of it." "And the other part?" She met his eyes. "My fiancé broke our engagement, publicly, made sure everyone knew why. I became inconvenient." Eli was quiet for a moment. Then he picked up the rabbits and said, "I don't care if you can have children or not. I need a partner, someone who can survive up here, that's all." Something loosened in Clara's chest. "That's all?" "That's all." He walked past her toward the cabin, then paused. "But if you're going to chop wood, do it right. You're wasting energy. I'll show you." And just like that, the wall between them cracked. Cha-chumped. Winter came early that year. By mid-November, snow blanketed the mountains, turning the world silent and white. The days grew shorter, the nights colder. Eli worked from dawn to dusk, preparing for the freeze, stocking firewood, reinforcing the barn, salting meat. Clara worked beside him, learning as she went. He taught her how to set traps, how to skin a rabbit, how to read the sky for storms. She taught him that coffee tasted better when you didn't burn it, that bread could be more than just flour and water, that silence didn't have to be heavy. They still didn't talk much, but the quiet between them shifted, became something almost comfortable. One night, as a blizzard howled outside, they sat by the fire together. Eli was mending a harness. Clara was sewing a patch onto his coat. "You're good at that," he said, nodding at her hands. "My mother taught me, before she died." "When was that?" 10 years ago. Fever." He nodded slowly. "My mother died when I was 12. Different sickness, same result." Clara glanced at him. "Is that why you came out here? To get away?" "Partly." He set the harness aside. "Mostly I got tired of people deciding what I was worth. Figured I'd rather be alone than deal with that." "And now?" He looked at her, and for the first time she saw something soft in his eyes. "Now I'm not alone." Her breath caught. "Clara," he said quietly, "I know this isn't what either of us planned, but I'm glad you're here." She didn't trust her voice, so she just nodded. Outside, the wind screamed. Inside, something new began to grow. On the first day of December, the contract came up again. They were sitting at the table eating stew when Eli said, "We should talk about the terms." Clara's spoon froze halfway to her mouth. "What about them?" "The 30 days are almost up." Her stomach twisted. I know. So we need to decide, do we follow through or do we not? She set her spoon down carefully. What do you want? I want to know what you want. Clara looked at him, this man who'd taken her in, taught her, trusted her. This man who'd never once made her feel like a burden. I want this to be real, she said. Not just a contract, a real marriage. Eli's expression didn't change, but his voice was rough when he said, so do I. Even knowing, I don't care about that. I care about you. Her throat tightened. Eli, I'm not good with words, Clara, but I know what I want, and I want you. Not because of some paper, because of you. She reached across the table and took his hand. His fingers were calloused, scarred, strong. They closed around hers like a promise. Then let's make it real, she whispered. That night, the cabin was warm. The fire burned low, and two people who'd come together out of necessity found something neither had expected. They found each other. The weeks that followed were different. Eli smiled more. Clara laughed. They worked side by side during the day and sat close by the fire at night. The cabin, once cold and empty, became a home, but winter in the mountains was unforgiving. In late January, a storm hit that lasted 3 days. Snow piled against the cabin walls. The temperature dropped so low that water froze in the bucket overnight. They burned through wood faster than Eli had planned, and by the third day he was outside in the blizzard, chopping more. Clara watched from the window, her heart in her throat. When he finally came back inside, his face was gray with cold, his hands shaking. You're freezing, she said, pulling him toward the fire. I'm fine. You're not fine. Sit down. She wrapped him in blankets, made him drink hot broth, rubbed warmth back into his hands. He didn't argue, just sat there, letting her care for him, his eyes closed. Clara, he said after a while. Yeah? Thank you. She kissed his forehead. For what? For staying. Her chest ached. Where else would I go? He opened his eyes and looked at her, really looked, the way he had that first night by the fire. I don't know what I did to deserve you, but I'm not letting you go. Good, she whispered, because I'm not going anywhere. The storm passed, the snow melted, and when spring finally came, it brought something neither of them had dared to hope for. Clara stood in the doorway one morning, her hand pressed to her stomach, tears streaming down her face. Eli found her there and knew immediately. Clara? She turned to him, her voice breaking. I don't know how. The doctor said, I don't care what the doctor said. He crossed the room and pulled her into his arms, holding her like she was the most precious thing in the world. We're going to be fine, he said. All of us. And for the first time in her life, Clara believed it. But peace never lasts. One afternoon in early April, a rider appeared on the road. A man in a fine coat, riding a horse too expensive for these mountains. Eli stepped out of the cabin, rifle in hand. Clara followed, her heart pounding. The man dismounted and smiled, a cold, sharp smile that made Clara's blood run ice. Hello, Clara, he said. Her voice came out as a whisper. Victor. Eli's grip on the rifle tightened. Who the hell are you? Victor Hale tipped his hat. The man she was supposed to marry. And just like that, everything changed. The silence that followed Victor Hale's introduction stretched so tight, Clara thought it might snap and cut them all. Eli hadn't moved, hadn't lowered the rifle, but she could see the tension coiling through his shoulders, the way his jaw had gone rigid. Victor, for his part, looked completely at ease. He brushed dust from his coat sleeve with the casual arrogance of a man who'd never had to fight for anything in his life. You're a long way from Philadelphia, Clara said, and hated how thin her voice sounded. Indeed I am. Dreadful journey. 3 weeks of rattling trains and coaches that smelled like wet livestock. Victor's eyes swept over the cabin, the rough-hewn logs, the patched roof. His lip curled slightly. Though I can see why you prefer it here. So much more rustic. What do you want? Eli's voice was flat, dangerous. Victor finally looked at him properly, taking in the rifle, the work-worn clothes, the man himself. Something flickered in his expression, amusement, maybe, or contempt. I'm here to speak with my former fiancée. This doesn't concern you. The hell it doesn't. She's my wife. Is she? Victor reached into his coat, and Eli raised the rifle an inch. Victor smiled. Easy, mountain man, just retrieving some papers. He pulled out a folded document, holding it up so they could see. I've been doing some research into frontier marriages. Fascinating process. Did you know that in certain territories, a contract marriage isn't legally binding until it's been registered with the territorial court? And that registration requires both parties to appear in person? Clara's stomach dropped. We signed the contract, Eli said. Oh, I'm sure you did. But signing it and making it legal are two different things. According to my information, you haven't made the journey to the courthouse in Silverton, which means, technically, Clara isn't actually your wife. Victor's smile widened. She's still Miss Whitlock, free to make her own choices. You son of a... Eli. Clara's hand on his arm stopped him. She could feel him shaking, not with fear, but with rage barely held in check. She stepped forward, putting herself between him and Victor. Why are you here? You made it clear you didn't want me. I made a mistake. Victor folded the papers back into his coat, his expression shifting to something that might have passed for sincerity if you didn't know him. I let pride and fear dictate my actions, but these months without you have shown me what I threw away. You're a remarkable woman, Clara. I was a fool to let you go. She almost laughed. Would have if the situation weren't so absurd and terrifying. You didn't let me go. You humiliated me. You told everyone who would listen that I was damaged goods. I was angry, hurt, but I've had time to think, to reconsider. The condition that concerned me, well, I've consulted with physicians in Boston who believe it's been overstated. There are treatments now, procedures that could get off my land. Eli's voice cut through Victor's speech like a blade. Now. Victor held up his hands in mock surrender. I'm simply offering Clara a choice. Return with me to Philadelphia, to the life she was meant for, or stay here in this wilderness married to a man she barely knows under a contract that may not even be legitimate. He looked past Eli to Clara. You deserve better than this. A real home. Society. A future. I have a future, Clara said, but the words felt weak even to her. Do you? What happens when winter comes and you're snowed in for months? When illness strikes and the nearest doctor is days away? When you're alone because your so-called husband is killed by a bear or a rock slide or simple bad luck? Victor shook his head. This isn't a life, Clara. It's survival. And you're better than that. That's enough. Eli stepped forward, and this time the rifle was pointed directly at Victor's chest. You've got 10 seconds to get back on that horse. Victor didn't move. I'll be at the boarding house in Miller's Crossing for the next week. If Clara wants to talk, really talk, without a gun pointed at her head, she knows where to find me. He tipped his hat. Think about it, darling. Think about what you're giving up. He mounted his horse with the ease of someone who'd never had to work a day in his life and rode back down the mountain path without looking back. Eli watched until he disappeared around the bend, then lowered the rifle. His hands were shaking. Eli, is it true? He turned to her, and the look on his face made her chest ache. About the registration? I don't know. The minister who arranged everything said the contract was binding, but I never thought to question, so it might not be legal. Does it matter? She reached for him, but he pulled away. Does it matter? Clara, if he's right, if we're not actually married, then everything we... He stopped, dragged a hand through his hair. Why the hell did he come all this way? Men like that don't chase after women they don't want. She knew the answer, had known it the moment she saw Victor's horse. His family has money, but not enough standing. Mine had the connections he needed. When he broke the engagement, it damaged his reputation more than he expected. People talk. They wonder what's wrong with a man who throws away an advantageous match over something like... She couldn't finish. Over something that shouldn't matter to anyone with half a heart. Eli's voice was bitter. So he wants you back because you're useful. Yes. And what do you want? The question hung between them, heavy and terrible. Clara looked at the cabin behind her, at the mountains rising beyond, at the man standing in front of her with fear written all over his face, even though he was trying to hide it. I want to stay, she said. I want this. Us. Whatever we have to do to make it real, I'll do it. Something in his expression cracked open. He pulled her against him, his arms tight around her, his face buried in her hair. We'll go to Silverton. Register the marriage. Make sure there's no question. It's a 3-day ride. The snow, oh, I don't care about the snow. We're doing this right. He pulled back enough to look at her. But Clara, you need to be sure. Because once we do this, once it's official, there's no going back. You'll be stuck here. With me. For better or worse. She touched his face, feeling the rough stubble, the warmth of his skin. I'm already stuck. I was stuck the moment I got in that wagon. He kissed her then, hard and desperate, like he was trying to prove something to both of them. When they finally broke apart, Clara said, "We should go inside. Plan this out properly." But even as they walked back to the cabin, she couldn't shake the feeling that Victor's arrival had changed something fundamental, had opened a door they wouldn't be able to close. The next morning brought fresh snow, and a temperature so cold the water in the basin had frozen solid. Eli was up before dawn, packing supplies for the trip to Silverton, while Clara made coffee and tried not to think about everything that could go wrong. "We'll leave tomorrow," Eli said, checking the contents of his saddlebag. "That'll give us time to make sure everything here is secure. Don't want to come back to frozen pipes or a collapsed roof." Clara nodded, watching him work. He moved with the efficiency of someone who'd learned to waste nothing. Not time, not energy, not words. It was one of the things she'd come to appreciate about him, this economy of purpose. But right now, it felt like he was building walls again, putting distance between them. "Talk to me," she said. He didn't look up. "What do you want me to say?" "Whatever you're thinking, because right now you're shutting me out, and I don't know why." His hands stilled on the pack. For a long moment, he didn't move. Then, quietly, "I'm scared." The admission startled her. Eli never admitted fear, never showed weakness. Of what? That he's right. That you'll wake up one day and realize you made a mistake choosing this life. He finally looked at her, and his eyes were raw. "I'm not stupid, Clara. I know what you gave up. I know what you could have if you went back with him. And I know I can't compete with that." She crossed the room and took the saddlebag from his hands, setting it aside. "You're not competing with anything. There is no choice. I chose you. I choose you. Now. But what about in a year, 5 years, when you're exhausted and isolated and wondering why you ever thought this was a good idea? Then I'll remember why I left Philadelphia in the first place." She grabbed his face, forcing him to look at her. "Victor didn't want me, Eli. He wanted a trophy, a useful connection. When I stopped being useful, he threw me away like garbage. You think I want to go back to that? To a life where my worth is measured by what I can do for someone else's ambitions? At least you'd be comfortable." "I'd be miserable." Her voice broke. "I'd rather freeze to death up here than spend one more day being someone's consolation prize." He pulled her against him, his arms wrapped so tight she could barely breathe. "I can't lose you. I can't." "You won't. I promise you won't." But promises were fragile things, and they both knew it. They spent the rest of the day preparing for the journey and trying to pretend everything was fine. Eli checked the horses, repaired a weak section of fence, chopped enough wood to last a week. Clara packed food, mended their warmest clothes, tried not to think about what would happen if Victor was right about the contract. That night, as they lay in bed with the fire burning low, Eli said, "Tell me about him, Victor." Clara stiffened. "Why?" "Because I need to know what I'm up against." She was quiet for a long time, trying to find words for something she'd spent months trying to forget. "We were engaged for 2 years. My father arranged it. Victor's family had money. Mine had connections. It seemed like a good match. He was charming, educated, knew all the right people. And I thought—" She stopped. "You thought what?" "I thought he loved me. Or at least that he could learn to. But after the diagnosis, after the doctor said what he said, Victor changed. Started making excuses not to see me. Started talking about postponing the wedding. And then one night at a dinner party, he stood up in front of everyone and announced that he couldn't in good conscience marry a woman who might die trying to give him an heir. He made it sound noble, like he was protecting me." Eli's hand found hers in the darkness. "I'm sorry." The worst part wasn't the humiliation. It was realizing that he'd never actually seen me, just saw what I could do for him. And when I couldn't do it anymore, I became invisible. She turned to face him. "You see me, Eli. You've seen me from the beginning. That's worth more than anything Victor could ever offer." He kissed her forehead. "I'll kill him if he tries to take you. Let's hope it doesn't come to that." But she heard the conviction in his voice and knew he meant it. They left for Silverton at first light, the horses' breath steaming in the cold air. The journey was brutal. The temperature never climbed above freezing, and the wind cut through their layers like knives. They made camp the first night in a stand of pines, huddled together under blankets while the horses stamped and snorted nearby. "How much farther?" Clara asked, her teeth chattering. "Another day and a half if the weather holds." Eli added another branch to the fire. "You holding up? Ask me when I can feel my toes again." He almost smiled. "When we get back, I'm building you a better coat. When we get back, I'm never leaving the cabin again." Deal. But the warmth of this moment faded quickly, replaced by the cold reality of why they were making this trip. They were running. From Victor, from doubt, from the possibility that everything they'd built could be torn apart by legal technicalities and old money. The second day was worse. Snow started falling around noon, thick and heavy, cutting visibility to almost nothing. Eli kept them moving, following landmarks he knew by heart, but Clara could see the tension in the set of his shoulders. They were racing against the storm. By the time they reached Silverton, darkness had fallen and the snow was coming down so hard Clara couldn't see the buildings until they were right in front of them. Eli led them to a boarding house on the edge of town, and they stumbled inside like refugees. The woman who ran the place took one look at them and clucked her tongue. "You two picked a hell of a day to travel. Storm's supposed to last through tomorrow." "We need a room," Eli said, "and we need to know where the courthouse is." "Courthouse is closed till Monday. Judge Harper doesn't work weekends." She handed him a key. "Room's upstairs, second door on the left. There's a bathhouse out back if you want to thaw out." Eli looked like he wanted to argue, but Clara touched his arm. "It's fine. We'll wait." They had no choice. The room was small but clean, with a narrow bed and a window that looked out on the snow-buried street. Eli paced while Clara unpacked their few belongings, his frustration evident in every movement. "2 more days," he muttered. "2 more days of not knowing. We'll survive it." She sat on the bed, suddenly exhausted. "We've survived worse." He stopped pacing and looked at her. "Have we?" "Eli, what's really bothering you? Because this isn't just about the registration." He was quiet for a long time. Then slowly, he sat down beside her. "My father was a tenant farmer back east. Worked land that didn't belong to him for a man who treated him like property. He died trying to save enough to buy his own place, and he never made it. I swore I'd never be like that. I'd never let anyone have power over me." His hands clenched into fists. "And now this bastard shows up and tells me the life I built, the marriage I made, might not even be legal. That he could take you away because of some technicality. It makes me feel like my father, powerless." Clara took his hands, uncurling his fists. "You're not powerless. And he can't take me. I won't let him. You say that now. I say it because it's true." She kissed his knuckles. "Monday, we'll go to the courthouse. We'll register the marriage, and then Victor Hale can go straight to hell." Eli pulled her close, and they sat there in the quiet room while snow piled against the windows and the rest of the world disappeared. Saturday dragged by with agonizing slowness. The storm kept them trapped inside, and the boarding house felt more like a cage with every passing hour. Eli couldn't settle, couldn't rest. He stood at the window for long stretches, staring out at the white-blanketed street like he expected Victor to materialize out of the snow. Clara tried to distract him with conversation, with touch, with anything that might ease the tension. But fear had its hooks in him, and he couldn't shake it loose. Sunday was worse. They were eating a quiet breakfast in the boarding house dining room when the door opened and Victor walked in. Clara's fork clattered against her plate. Victor shook snow from his coat and smiled when he spotted them. "What a remarkable coincidence. Here I was thinking I'd have to ride all the way back up that mountain to continue our conversation." He crossed to their table, uninvited, and pulled out a chair. "Mind if I join you?" "Yes," Eli said. Victor sat anyway. "I've been thinking about our situation, about what's fair for everyone involved, and I have a proposal." He looked at Clara. "Come back to Philadelphia with me. Not as my fiancée, not yet anyway, but as my guest. Give yourself time to remember what civilization feels like. Then, if you still want to return to this—" He gestured vaguely at Eli. "Arrangement. I won't stop you." "She's not going anywhere with you," Eli said. "I wasn't asking you." Victor's eyes never left Clara's face. "What do you say? 1 month. That's all I'm asking. 1 month to clear your head and make sure you're not choosing this life simply because you feel you have no other option. Clara's heart was pounding so hard she could hear it. I don't need a month. I don't need a day. My answer is no. Are you certain? Because from where I'm sitting, you look tired, Clara. Worn down. Is this really the life you want? Sleeping in boarding houses, scraping by on the edge of nowhere. Better than sleeping in a mansion with a man who sees me as property. Something flashed in Victor's eyes, anger, finally breaking through the polished veneer. I'm offering you a way out, a chance at the life you were supposed to have. She has the life she's supposed to have. Eli stood, his chair scraping against the floor. And you need to leave. Now. Or what? You'll shoot me in the middle of a dining room? Victor laughed. You're not in your mountains now, farmer. There are laws here. Consequences. Then I'll deal with them. Eli's hand moved to his belt, where Clara knew he kept a knife. Eli, don't! She grabbed his arm, her voice urgent. He's not worth it. Victor stood as well, brushing imaginary dust from his sleeves. I'll be at the hotel across the street when you come to your senses. And you will. You know where to find me. He tipped his hat to Clara. I do hope you'll make the right choice. He left before Eli could respond, the door swinging shut behind him. The dining room had gone silent. Every person there was staring at them. Clara felt heat crawling up her neck, the old shame of being the center of unwanted attention. Let's go, Eli said quietly. They went back to their room, and Eli locked the door behind them like it could keep the world out. Clara sat on the bed, her hands shaking. He's not going to stop, she said. Even after we register the marriage, he'll find some other way to let him try. Eli knelt in front of her, taking her hands. Clara, look at me. I don't care what he does. I don't care what kind of legal tricks he pulls or how much money he throws around. You're mine. We're married in every way that matters. And come Monday, we'll make it official. But what if he's right? What if the contract isn't, well, then we'll make a new one. We'll stand in front of that judge and say the words and sign whatever papers they put in front of us. Hell, we'll get married 10 more times if that's what it takes. His grip tightened. I'm not losing you to that bastard. She kissed him, hard and desperate, trying to pour every ounce of certainty she had into it. When they broke apart, she whispered, I love you. He went very still. What? I love you. I should have said it before, but I was scared, and I didn't know if you... I love you too. The words came out rough, like they'd been locked away for so long he'd forgotten how to say them. I've loved you since you picked up that axe and told me you weren't going to be useless. Maybe before that. I don't know. But I know I can't do this without you. They held each other as the afternoon light faded and the storm outside finally began to ease. Monday morning dawned clear and painfully bright, the sun reflecting off fresh snow until everything looked like it had been carved from diamonds. Clara dressed carefully, putting on her best dress, the one she'd worn the day she arrived at Miller's Crossing, a lifetime ago, and tried to calm the nerves jumping in her stomach. This was it. The moment that would make everything real or tear it apart. Eli was already downstairs settling their bill with the boarding house owner. He looked up when Clara appeared, and something in his expression softened. You look beautiful, he said. I look terrified. That too. They walked to the courthouse through streets still quiet with early morning. The building was small, just a single story of weathered wood with a sign over the door that read Territorial Court. Inside, a clerk sat at a desk, shuffling papers with the bored efficiency of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. Help you? He asked without looking up. We need to register a marriage contract, Eli said. The clerk finally glanced up, taking in their worn clothes and anxious faces. You got the contract with you? Eli handed it over. The clerk scanned it, his expression unchanging. Says here you were married back in October. Why are you just now registering? We didn't know we needed to, Clara said. No one told us. Most people don't bother until there's a property dispute or inheritance issue. He pulled out a ledger and started copying information. But it's smart to do it official. Makes things cleaner. He looked up at them. I'll need both your signatures here, and the judge will need to see you swear to the marriage. He's in his chambers. Wait here. The clerk disappeared through a door at the back, leaving them alone in the small office. Eli reached for Clara's hand, and she gripped it tight. We're doing this, she said. We're doing this. The door opened and an older man emerged, Judge Harper, presumably. He had white hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. "You're the couple wanting to register?" "Yes, sir," Eli said. The judge looked them over, then at the contract the clerk had handed him. "Says here this is a contract marriage arranged by correspondence. That true?" "Yes, sir." "And you've been living as man and wife since October?" "Yes, sir." "Any children?" Clara's breath caught. "Not yet." The judge's eyes softened slightly. "Well, that's between you and fate. Far as I'm concerned, if you're both standing here of your own free will wanting to make this official, I'm not going to stand in your way. This is frontier territory, and we do things practical out here." He picked up a pen. "Raise your right hands." They did. "Do you, Elias Crow, take Clara Whitlock as your lawfully wedded wife?" "I do." "And do you, Clara Whitlock, take Elias Crow as your lawfully wedded husband?" Clara's voice was steady. "I do." "Then by the power vested in me by the territorial court, I pronounce you husband and wife. Sign here." They signed. The clerk witnessed. The judge stamped the document with a heavy seal that seemed to echo in the small room. And just like that, it was done. They were married, legally, officially, irrevocably. Clara felt something unlock in her chest. Something she hadn't realized was being held closed. Eli's hand was warm in hers, solid and real. "Congratulations," the judge said, handing Eli a certified copy of the registration. "You'll want to keep this somewhere safe." They left the courthouse in a daze, stepping out into sunlight that seemed brighter than before. Eli stopped on the steps and pulled Clara into his arms, kissing her in full view of anyone who cared to watch. When they finally broke apart, he said, "You're stuck with me now." "Good." They were halfway back to the boarding house to collect their things when a familiar voice called out, "Clara!" She turned to see Victor striding toward them, his face set in grim determination. Her stomach sank. "I heard you went to the courthouse," he said. "Tell me you didn't—" Eli held up the registration certificate. "We did. It's done. Legal and binding. Now get out of our way." Victor stared at the paper like it was a death sentence. Then his expression hardened. "You think this changes anything? You think a piece of paper makes you safe?" "I think it makes you irrelevant," Clara said. His eyes flashed. "You're making a mistake." "No, I made a mistake 2 years ago when I agreed to marry you. This is me fixing it." Victor took a step closer, his voice dropping. "You'll regret this, Clara. When you're old before your time, when you've given the best years of your life to scratching out an existence in those mountains, you'll remember that I offered you something better, and you'll hate yourself for refusing it." "Maybe," she said, "but at least I'll be free." For a moment she thought he might hit her, might do something that would give Eli an excuse to finish what they'd both been itching for. But Victor just smiled, cold and terrible. "We'll see," he said. "We'll see how long that freedom lasts." He walked away without looking back, and Clara felt the first whisper of real fear curl down her spine. Because men like Victor didn't just accept defeat, they came back with something worse. They didn't talk much on the ride back to the cabin. The certified registration sat folded in Eli's coat pocket like a talisman against everything Victor had threatened, but Clara couldn't shake the cold knot in her stomach. She'd seen that look on Victor's face before, back in Philadelphia, when a business rival had tried to undercut one of his father's deals. 3 weeks later, the rival's warehouse had burned to the ground. No proof, of course. Never any proof. Just coincidence and very convenient timing. The mountains felt different now, less like sanctuary and more like isolation. Every shadow between the trees made her flinch. Every crack of a branch sounded like footsteps. "You're thinking too loud," Eli said as they crested the final ridge before home. "I'm thinking he meant what he said." "I know he did." Eli's jaw was set in that stubborn line she'd come to recognize. "But we're legal now. He can't touch that." "Legal doesn't mean safe. Not with men like Victor." He pulled his horse to a stop and turned to look at her. "You want to tell me what you're really scared of?" Clara met his eyes and saw nothing but steady resolve there. No judgment, just the question. "Victor's father owns half the judges between here and Chicago. His uncle sits on the territorial legislature. When I say he has influence, I mean the kind that doesn't care about pieces of paper or what's right, the kind that just takes what it wants. He can't take you." "No, but he can take everything else." She gestured at the valley spread below them, the cabin a small, dark square against the snow. Your land. Your claim. He's been here 3 days and he already knows the law better than we do. What if there's some loophole, some technicality that lets him? Then we'll fight it. With what? We don't have money for lawyers. We don't have connections. We have a marriage certificate and a homestead claim. And if he decides to come after those, we'll be fighting uphill the whole way. Eli was quiet for a moment, his gloved hands tight on the reins. When he spoke, his voice was low and hard. My whole life, people have told me what I couldn't have. Couldn't own land because I was born poor. Couldn't make something of myself because I didn't have the right name or the right family. I came out here because I was done listening to that. I built this place with my own hands, and no rich bastard from Philadelphia is going to take it from me. I'm not saying you should give up. Good. Because I won't. He nudged his horse forward again. And neither will you. We didn't come this far to fold the first time someone threatens us. She followed him down the slope, wanting to believe him, trying to hold on to that certainty. But fear had its claws in her now, and it whispered things she didn't want to hear. Whispered that love wasn't enough. That determination couldn't stop a man with money and power and nothing to lose. The cabin looked exactly as they'd left it, untouched and waiting. They'd been gone 4 days, but it felt like longer. Clara dismounted stiffly, her whole body aching from the cold ride, and started unpacking while Eli saw to the horses. Inside, everything was frozen. The water bucket, the cloth on the table. Even the air felt solid, heavy with cold that had settled in during their absence. Clara got a fire going and started the slow process of warming the place back to livable, while her mind spun in circles she couldn't stop. Eli came in carrying their saddlebags and stopped when he saw her standing motionless in front of the fireplace, staring at nothing. Clara. She didn't turn around. Tell me we're going to be okay. We're going to be okay. You don't know that. No, he admitted. But I know we're not going to fall apart waiting for him to make his move. We're going to keep living, keep building, and if he comes after us, we'll deal with it then. And if we can't? He crossed to her and turned her around, his hands on her shoulders. Then we'll go down fighting, together. But I'm not going to spend every day looking over my shoulder, waiting for the axe to fall. That's not living. That's just dying slow. She leaned into him, feeling the warmth of his body through the layers of wool and leather. I'm scared. I know, so am I. He kissed the top of her head. But we've been scared before. We'll get through this too. 3 weeks passed without word from Victor, and Clara started to think maybe he'd given up. Maybe the registration really had been enough to send him back east, defeated and empty-handed. She should have known better. The first sign of trouble came on a Tuesday morning in late February. Eli had gone down to Miller's Crossing to pick up supplies, leaving Clara alone to tend the cabin and feed the animals. She was hauling water from the well when she heard hoofbeats on the frozen road. 2 men emerged from the tree line, both wearing heavy coats and official-looking badges. Her stomach dropped. Morning, ma'am, the older one called out. He had gray in his beard and eyes like chips of flint. This the Crow homestead? It is. Can I help you? They dismounted and the older man pulled a folded paper from his coat. Name's Marshal Henley. This is Deputy Brooks. We're here on official business regarding a land claim dispute. Clara's hands went numb. What dispute? Says here that Elias Crow's homestead claim overlaps with a prior claim filed by a Mr. Victor Hale of Philadelphia. We're here to investigate the boundaries and determine legal ownership. That's impossible. My husband has been here 8 years. He filed his claim long before. That may be, ma'am, but Mr. Hale has documentation showing his family purchased this section from the Territorial Land Office in 1867. If that's true, then Mr. Crow's been squatting on private property. Henley's expression wasn't unkind, but it wasn't sympathetic either, just bureaucratic. We need to see Mr. Crow's claim papers. Clara's mind raced. The claim papers were in a tin box under the bed, along with their marriage certificate and what little money they had saved. But something about this felt wrong, too convenient, too perfectly timed. My husband isn't here right now, she said carefully. You'll have to come back when... We'll wait. Brooks spoke for the first time, his voice flat. He was younger than Henley, with the kind of face that showed nothing. Don't want you having time to misplace anything important. The threat was barely veiled. Clara felt anger burn through the fear. Are you accusing me of something? Just being thorough, ma'am. She wanted to tell them to get off her property, to come back with Eli present, to do anything other than let them inside. But they had badges and legal authority, and she had nothing but righteous anger and a sick feeling in her gut. Fine. Wait here. She went inside, her hands shaking as she pulled the tin box from under the bed. The claim papers were there, yellowed but intact, with Eli's signature and the territorial seal. She brought them out and handed them to Henley. He studied them for a long moment, then exchanged a look with Brooks she couldn't read. "These look legitimate," Henley said slowly, "but we'll need to verify them against the land office records, and we'll need to survey the boundaries to make sure there's no overlap." "When?" "We'll be back tomorrow with a surveyor. Make sure your husband's here." They left without another word, and Clara stood in the snow watching them go, the claim papers clutched in her hand. Her first instinct was to ride down to Miller's Crossing and find Eli, but she forced herself to think. If this was Victor's move, and it had to be, then splitting them up was probably part of the plan. She needed to stay here, protect what was theirs, and wait for Eli to come home. The afternoon dragged. Clara tried to keep busy, but every task felt hollow. She cleaned the cabin, fed the chickens, chopped wood until her shoulders screamed. None of it helped. Eli finally rode up just before dark, the wagon loaded with supplies. He knew something was wrong the moment he saw her face. "What happened?" She told him. Everything. The marshals, the claim dispute, Victor's documentation. Eli's expression went darker with every word until he looked like thunder. "Son of a bitch," he breathed when she finished. He bought forged papers. Had to. There's no way his family owned this section. "How do you know?" "Because I checked. Before I filed my claim, I spent 2 weeks in the land office going through every record for this township. This section was unclaimed federal land. I staked it legal and proper." He paced the cabin, his hands clenching and unclenching. "But if he's got papers that look official, if he's got a marshal willing to investigate, they're coming back tomorrow with a surveyor." "Of course they are." Eli stopped pacing and looked at her. "This is it. This is his play. He can't take you, so he's going to take the land, force us out, leave us with nothing." "What do we do?" "We prove he's lying." Eli grabbed his coat. "I'm writing to the land office tonight. I need the original claim records, every document they have showing this land was available when I filed. If we can show his papers are fraudulent, the land office is 3 days away. Then I'll ride fast." He pulled her close, his voice urgent. "You stay here. Don't let anyone inside. Don't sign anything. Don't agree to anything. I'll be back before they can do anything official." "Eli, it's dark. The roads. I don't care about the roads. I care about keeping what's ours." He kissed her hard. "Trust me." "I do. But I'm scared." "So am I. But we're not losing this." He grabbed supplies, throwing them in a saddlebag with quick, angry movements. "If anyone gives you trouble, you take the rifle and you don't hesitate. Understand?" She nodded, her throat tight. He was gone within 10 minutes, riding into the darkness like a man pursued by demons. Clara watched until she couldn't see him anymore, then went inside and barred the door. That night was the longest of her life. She sat by the fire with the rifle across her knees, jumping at every sound. The wind, the settling of logs, the skitter of some small animal across the roof. All of it sounded like footsteps, like threats, like the world closing in. She must have dozed off sometime near dawn because she woke to pounding on the door and pale sunlight streaming through the window. "Mrs. Crow, open up!" Clara grabbed the rifle and went to the door, her heart hammering. "Who's there?" "Marshal Henley. We're here with the surveyor, like we said. Need to talk to you and your husband." She cracked the door open. Henley stood on the porch with Brooks and a third man she didn't recognize, thin and nervous-looking, carrying surveying equipment. "My husband had to travel on business," Clara said. "He'll be back in a few days." Henley's eyes narrowed. "Convenient timing." "It's the truth." "Well, that's unfortunate, because Mr. Hale's representative is here, and they're insisting we settle this matter quickly." He gestured down the path, and Clara's stomach dropped. Victor stood by the fence, arms crossed, looking like he owned the place already. "This is harassment," Clara said, her voice shaking. "You can't just—" "We're following proper legal procedure, ma'am. Now you can either cooperate with the survey, or we can come back with a court order. Your choice." She wanted to slam the door in his face, wanted to point the rifle at all of them and tell them to get off her land. but she could see how that would end, and it wouldn't be in her favor. Fine, survey, but you're not coming inside. Don't need to, ma'am. We're just measuring the boundaries. They spent the next 3 hours tramping around the property with their equipment while Clara watched from the porch, the rifle never far from her hands. Victor stayed back, observing everything with that same cold smile. Once, he caught her eye and tipped his hat. She looked away. When they finally finished, Henley came back to the porch with a paper covered in notes and measurements. Preliminary results show the boundaries of Mr. Hale's documented claim do overlap with your husband's homestead. Specifically, this cabin and about 40 acres around it fall within the disputed section. Clara's vision went gray at the edges. That's impossible. According to a survey paid for by the man trying to steal our land. Her voice rose. This is fraud, and you know it. Henley's expression hardened. Careful with your accusations, ma'am. Mr. Hale has legitimate documentation, forged documentation. That's for the court to decide. He folded the paper and tucked it away. There'll be a hearing in Silverton next week. Both parties need to be present with all relevant documents. The judge will make a final determination. And until then, this property is under dispute. Neither party can make improvements or remove anything from the land. He paused. Including you, Mrs. Crow. You'll need to stay here to maintain possession. It was a trap. She saw it immediately. Keep her here, isolated while Eli was gone. Make her vulnerable. I understand, she said through gritted teeth. After they left, Victor approached the porch alone. Clara raised the rifle. That's far enough. He stopped, hands up in mock surrender. I just want to talk. We have nothing to say to each other. Don't we? Clara, this doesn't have to be ugly. I can make this go away. All you have to do is agree to an annulment. Leave with me. Your husband keeps his land, you keep your dignity. Everyone wins. Except I'd be with you. His smile faltered. You're being stubborn. I'm being honest. I don't love you, Victor. I don't even like you. And I'm not leaving my husband, even if it costs him everything he's built. The question hung in the air, ugly and pointed. Clara's finger tightened on the trigger. Get off my land. It's not your land, not anymore. The court's going to rule in my favor. I've made sure of it. And then you'll be out here with nothing. Is that really what you want? To drag him down with you? I want you gone. Now. Victor studied her for a long moment, then shook his head. You're making a mistake, but I suppose some people have to learn the hard way. He turned to leave, then paused. The hearing's in 6 days. I'll see you there. Try not to look too desperate. He walked away, and Clara stood on the porch with the rifle in her hands and tears burning her eyes. Because she knew, with sick certainty, that he was right about one thing. This was going to cost them everything. Eli made it back 5 days later, looking like he'd ridden through hell. His horse was lathered and limping. His face was haggard with exhaustion and something darker, defeat. Clara ran out to meet him. Did you get them? The records? He dismounted slowly, like his whole body hurt. The land office burned down 2 nights ago. Her blood went cold. What? Fire started in the records room. They lost everything. Claims, deeds, surveys, all of it. 30 years of documentation, gone. His voice was hollow. The clerk said it was an accident, faulty lamp. But the timing... Victor. Has to be. I can't prove it, but I know. He pulled her against him, and she felt him shaking. I'm sorry, Clara. I'm so sorry. I should have kept copies. Should have... This isn't your fault, isn't it? I brought you into this, promised you a home, and now... We still have the claim papers, the ones I showed the marshal. Those are legal proof against forged documents backed by money and influence. Clara, without the land office records, we can't prove my claim predates his. It's our word against his paperwork. And guess which one a judge is going to believe? She pulled back to look at him. His eyes were red-rimmed, exhausted, and full of the kind of pain that came from watching everything you loved slip away. So we're just giving up? Her voice came out sharper than she meant. That's it? He wins. I didn't say that. Then what are you saying? Eli was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was carefully controlled. I'm saying we need to be smart. We go to the hearing, we present our case. We hope the judge is honest. But Clara, we need to prepare for the possibility that, no, She stepped back. I didn't fight this hard to just accept defeat. There has to be something we can do. Like what? We don't have lawyers, we don't have connections, we barely have proof. We have the truth. The truth doesn't always win. He looked at her with something like pity, and she hated it. I've seen this before back east. Rich men take what they want and the law helps them do it. I thought out here would be different, but it is different. We're different. Clara's hands clenched into fists. I'm not the woman who ran away from Philadelphia, and you're not the man who accepted what life handed him. We built this place. We fought for it, and I'll be damned if I let Victor Hale take it without a fight. Something flickered in Eli's expression. Hope, maybe. Or just desperate want to believe. What are you proposing? I don't know yet. But there are people in this territory who know you, who know what you've built here. Maybe we can't fight Victor's money, but we can fight with testimony. With witnesses. With everyone who knows this land was yours long before he showed up. You think that'll be enough? I think it's better than nothing. She took his hands. We have 6 days until the hearing. Let's use them. The next morning, they rode down to Miller's Crossing together. The town was small, barely 50 people scattered across a few square miles, but everyone knew everyone, and word traveled fast. By the time they reached the general store, half the town had already heard about the land dispute. Tom Jensen, the storekeeper, met them at the door. Heard you're having trouble with some Philadelphia dandy trying to steal your claim. Word travels, Eli said. It does when the dandy in question has been throwing money around and asking questions about you. Tom jerked his thumb over his shoulder. He was in here yesterday, buying supplies. Wanted to know how long you'd been up here, whether you'd filed proper, whether anyone had issues with you. I told him to go to hell. Clara felt something warm bloom in her chest. You did? Of course I did. You're good people. Pay your bills, don't cause trouble. Helped my wife when she broke her leg last winter. That counts for something. He looked at Eli. What do you need? Witnesses. People willing to testify that I've been working this land since before Victor Hale ever heard of this territory. Tom nodded slowly. I can do that. So can most folks around here. We remember when you first showed up, half-starved and stubborn. Remember you building that cabin log by log. We'll back you. They spent the next 3 days riding to every homestead within 20 miles, telling their story, asking for help. And one by one, people said yes. The widow Patterson, who Eli had helped repair her barn. The Kowalski family, whose son he'd found when the boy got lost in a storm. The miners who bought vegetables from their garden. The rancher who traded beef for Clara's bread. Every person had a story. Every person remembered. By the time they rode back up the mountain, Clara felt something she hadn't felt in weeks. Not quite hope, but close. The fragile belief that maybe, just maybe, they had a chance. The night before the hearing, they sat up late going over everything. The claim papers, the marriage certificate, the list of witnesses who'd agreed to testify. It wasn't much, but it was something. What if it's not enough? Clara asked quietly. Eli looked up from his papers spread across the table. Then we find another way. What other way? I don't know yet. But Clara, I need you to understand something. He set the papers aside and took her hands. No matter what happens tomorrow, no matter what that judge decides, this doesn't end. If we lose the claim, we'll file somewhere else. Start over. I've done it before. I don't want to start over. I want this, our home. I know, so do I. But if it comes down to choosing between this land and you, he squeezed her hands. I choose you, every time. She kissed him, tasting salt and fear and determination all mixed together. Then let's make sure we don't have to choose. They made love that night with an urgency that bordered on desperation, like they were trying to prove something to themselves. That they were real. That what they'd built couldn't be taken. That love was enough to stand against money and power and corruption. Clara wanted to believe it, needed to believe it. But when morning came and they rode towards Silverton, the fear was back, cold and heavy in her stomach. Because she'd learned something in the months since leaving Philadelphia. Love wasn't always enough. Sometimes the world just took what it wanted, and all you could do was watch it burn. The courthouse in Silverton was packed, every bench filled, people standing along the walls. Clara had never seen so many folks show up for a land dispute. Then she saw why. Victor sat at the front with 2 lawyers in expensive suits, looking calm and confident. But behind him, scattered throughout the room, were the people from Miller's Crossing. The widow Patterson, Tom Jensen, the Kowalskis, the miners and ranchers and homesteaders who'd promised to stand with them. They'd all come. Eli's hand found hers and squeezed. "We've got a chance." Judge Harper entered and the room went quiet. He looked older than Clara remembered, more tired. He settled into his chair and surveyed the packed courtroom with something like resignation. "Well," he said, "seems this case has attracted some attention. Let's get started. Mr. Hale, you're bringing the claim. Present your case." Victor's lead lawyer stood, a sharp-faced man named Garrison, who spoke with the kind of polish that came from expensive schools and courtrooms where outcomes were decided before anyone walked in. "Your Honor, my client's family purchased this section from the Territorial Land Office in 1867. We have the deed, properly notarized and recorded. Mr. Crow's subsequent claim was filed without proper research and overlaps significantly with my client's legal property. We're asking the court to recognize Mr. Hale's prior claim and order Mr. Crow to vacate." He produced the deed with a flourish. It looked official, professional, exactly like something that would convince a judge. Clara's stomach dropped. Judge Harper examined the document, his expression unreadable. "Mr. Crow, your response." Eli stood, his claim papers in hand. He wasn't a lawyer, didn't have the polish or the practice. But when he spoke, his voice was steady. "Your Honor, I filed my homestead claim in 1868 after checking the land office records personally. This section was listed as unclaimed federal land. I've been working it ever since. That deed he's showing you can't be legitimate because this land wasn't available for private purchase in 1867. Can you prove that?" The land office records would prove it, but they burned last week. Convenient timing. Garrison was on his feet immediately. "Your Honor, my client had nothing to do with that fire. The authorities ruled it accidental." "Did they?" Clara stood without thinking. "Or did they rule it whatever they were paid to rule?" "Mrs. Crow," Judge Harper said sharply, "you'll have your chance to speak. Sit down." She sat, her face burning. Eli's hand found hers under the table. The hearing dragged on for hours. Garrison presented documents, surveys, expert testimony from a land specialist who'd probably never been west of Chicago. All of it carefully crafted to look legitimate. Then it was their turn. Eli testified about arriving in the territory, filing his claim, building the cabin. Clara testified about the marriage, about their life, about what the land meant to them. And then, one by one, their witnesses took the stand. Tom Jensen testified about Eli arriving in Miller's Crossing in late 1867, asking about available land. The widow Patterson testified about the cabin being built in 1868. The rancher testified about trading with them for years. The Kowalski boy, now 13, testified about Eli saving his life during that storm back in '69. Every testimony built on the last, creating a picture of a man who'd been there, working that land, long before Victor Hale appeared. But Garrison tore into each one, questioned their memories, suggested they were lying to help a friend, pointed out that memory was unreliable, that testimony without documentation was just stories. By the time the last witness finished, Clara felt hollowed out. They'd given everything they had, and she couldn't tell if it was enough. Judge Harper called a recess to review the evidence. They waited in the hallway while the courthouse buzzed with speculation. Eli paced. Clara sat on a bench, her hands clasped so tight her knuckles went white. "We did everything we could," Eli said. "I know. Whatever happens, don't say it yet." He sat beside her, and they waited in silence that felt like drowning. When they were called back, Judge Harper looked grim. He surveyed the packed courtroom, then began to speak. "This case has presented significant challenges. On one hand, we have documentation that appears legitimate. On the other, we have testimony from credible witnesses and a man who has clearly been working this land for years." He paused. "However, in matters of property law, documentation must take precedence over testimony. Without the land office records to verify Mr. Crow's claim, I have no choice but to—" "Your Honor!" Everyone turned. A man Clara didn't recognize stood at the back of the courtroom, holding up a leather satchel. He was dusty from travel, his face windburned. "Who are you?" Judge Harper demanded. "Samuel Wright, clerk from the Territorial Land Office in Denver. I heard about this case and thought you might need these." He walked forward and handed the satchel to the judge. "Backup records. We keep duplicates of all major claims and deeds in Denver. Started doing it 5 years ago after a fire in the Cheyenne office. Judge Harper opened the satchel, and Clara's heart nearly stopped. Inside were copies, dozens of them. Claims, deeds, surveys. The judge pulled out papers, scanning them quickly. His expression changed. According to these records, he said slowly, Section 23 was listed as available federal land in 1868 when Mr. Crow filed his claim. Furthermore, he pulled out another document. The deed Mr. Hale presented shows a purchase date of 1867, but there's no corresponding record of such a sale in the Denver files. If this sale had been legitimate, there would be a duplicate. Garrison was on his feet. Your Honor, the Denver records could be incomplete. They could be, but they're a hell of a lot more complete than nothing. Judge Harper's voice was hard now. Mr. Garrison, I'm going to ask you directly. Did your client forge this deed? Absolutely not. Your client committed fraud. The judge slammed his hand on the bench. And he did it in my courtroom. Mr. Hale, stand up. Victor stood slowly, his face pale. I don't know how things work in Philadelphia, Judge Harper said, but out here we don't take kindly to rich men trying to steal land from folks who've earned it. Your deed is fraudulent, your claim is dismissed, and if I ever see you in my courtroom again, I'll have you arrested for perjury. Get out. The courtroom erupted. Clara couldn't hear anything over the roaring in her ears, couldn't see anything except Eli's face as he turned to her, disbelief and joy and relief all crashing together. They'd won. They'd actually won. Victor's lawyers were already packing their briefcases, moving with the sharp efficiency of men who knew when a fight was lost. But Victor himself stood frozen in the middle of the courtroom chaos, staring at Judge Harper like he couldn't quite process what had just happened. Clara watched his face cycle through disbelief, rage, and finally something uglier, humiliation. She'd seen that expression before back in Philadelphia when things didn't go his way. It never ended well. Eli's arm wrapped around her waist, pulling her close as people from Miller's Crossing crowded around them with congratulations and backslapping joy. Tom Jensen was grinning like he'd won the claim himself. The widow Patterson had tears streaming down her weathered face. Even the Kowalski boy was whooping, his voice cracking with adolescent excitement. Order! Judge Harper's gavel cracked against wood. We're not done yet. Mr. Wright, I need those documents entered into official record, and I want a full investigation into how that forged deed was created. Someone produced those papers, and I want to know who. The clerk from Denver nodded, already moving toward the judge's bench with his satchel. Victor finally seemed to unfreeze, his face hardening into that mask of cold control Clara remembered so well. This isn't over, he said quietly, but his voice carried in the settling courtroom. Judge Harper fixed him with a look that could cut steel. Yes, Mr. Hale, it is. Your claim is dismissed. Your deed is fraudulent. And if you had any hand in that land office fire, and I suspect you did, you'd better hope I can't prove it, because attempted fraud is one thing. Arson and destruction of government property is another entirely. You have no evidence linking me to, yet. I have no evidence yet. The judge leaned forward. But I'm a patient man, and I've got friends in the territorial marshal's office who are very interested in wealthy Easterners who think they can buy their way out west. Now get out of my courtroom before I find you in contempt. Victor's jaw clenched, but he had enough sense left to know when to retreat. He gestured to his lawyers, and they filed out through the crowd that parted with hostile silence. Clara felt every eye on him, felt the weight of communal judgment settling like a sentence. Out here, reputation mattered. And Victor Hale had just destroyed his. But as he passed their bench, he stopped, looked at Clara with those cold blue eyes she'd once thought were handsome. You could have had everything, he said, voice low enough that only she and Eli could hear. A real life, security, a future that didn't involve scraping by in the dirt. I have everything, Clara said. You just can't recognize it because it's not for sale. Something flickered across his face, pain maybe, or the closest thing to it a man like Victor could feel. You'll regret this. Maybe not today, maybe not next year, but when you're 40 and worn out from this life, when you've buried your dreams in that mountain soil, you'll remember I offered you a way out, and I'll still choose him. She felt Eli tense beside her, felt his hand tighten on her waist. Because he sees me, Victor, actually sees me. Not as property or a useful connection, but as a person. You never learned how to do that. For a moment she thought he might respond, might let that polished facade crack enough to show the hurt underneath. But Victor Hale had spent his whole life learning to hide, to control, to never show weakness. He just smiled, cold and empty as a winter sky. "Goodbye, Clara. I hope your choices keep you warm at night." He walked out, and Clara felt something release in her chest. Not relief exactly. More like the easing of a grip she hadn't realized was still there. Some last hold Philadelphia had on her finally letting go. Eli turned her to face him, his hands framing her face. "You okay?" "Yeah, I think I actually am." He kissed her, right there in the courthouse with half the territory watching, and she kissed him back like it was a promise, like it was proof of everything she'd just claimed. When they finally broke apart, Judge Harper was watching them with something approaching approval. "Mr. and Mrs. Crow, I'm entering a permanent record of your homestead claim. No one's going to challenge your ownership of that land again, not while I'm sitting on this bench. You've earned it." "Thank you, Your Honor," Eli said, his voice rough. "For listening, for being fair." "I'm not always fair, son, but I try to be just. There's a difference." The judge gathered his papers. "Now get out of here and get back to your home. And Mrs. Crow?" He looked at Clara. "That took courage, what you said up there. Standing up for what's yours. This territory needs more people like you." Clara nodded, not trusting her voice. They made their way through the crowd of well-wishers, accepting handshakes and congratulations, promising to visit Miller's Crossing soon, thanking everyone who'd testified. It took nearly an hour to escape the courthouse, and by the time they stepped outside into the crisp afternoon air, Clara felt wrung out and strangely fragile. "Let's go home," she said. Eli took her hand. "Let's go home." They rode out of Silverton as the sun began its descent toward the mountains, painting the snow-covered peaks in shades of orange and pink that looked almost unreal. The horses seemed to sense their relief, moving with easy confidence along the familiar trail. Neither of them spoke much. There wasn't a need. The silence between them had stopped being empty months ago. Now it was comfortable, full of understanding that didn't require words. But as they climbed higher into the foothills, Clara felt a strange restlessness building. They'd won. The land was theirs, legally and irrevocably. Victor was defeated, humiliated, sent back east with nothing. They should be celebrating. So why did she feel like something was still unfinished? "What are you thinking?" Eli asked as they stopped to water the horses at a creek. Clara watched the water slide over ice-edged rocks, trying to sort through the tangle in her head. "I keep waiting for the other shoe to drop." "There is no other shoe, it's done." "I know. Logically, I know that. But Victor's not the type to just accept defeat. He'll find some other way to—" "Clara." Eli turned her to face him. "He's gone. He has no claim, no legal standing, and after what happened in that courtroom, no credibility out here. He's finished. You don't know him like I do. Maybe not. But I know men like him. All they have is money and the systems that protect it. Take away the system, and they're just hollow. He came out here thinking he could buy what he wanted, and he learned different. That's going to eat at him, sure. But he's not stupid enough to come back." Clara wanted to believe that. Needed to believe it. "What if you're wrong? Then we'll handle it. Together." He brushed snow from her hair, his touch gentle. "But I think you're looking for threats because you're not used to winning. You spent so long fighting just to survive that you don't know how to stop." The observation hit harder than she expected. She'd been running since Philadelphia, from scandal, from judgment, from the life that had tried to suffocate her. Even after arriving at the cabin, she'd been fighting the land, the weather, her own fears about whether she could survive this life. And then fighting Victor when he showed up trying to take it all away. Maybe Eli was right. Maybe she didn't know how to just be, how to exist without bracing for the next disaster. "So what do we do now?" she asked. "We live. We build. We figure out what comes next without looking over our shoulders." He smiled, and it transformed his whole face. "We get to just be happy, Clara. That's what we do now." The concept felt foreign and fragile, like something that might shatter if she gripped it too hard. But she tried to hold on to it anyway as they remounted and continued up the mountain toward home. They reached the cabin just after dark. The familiar silhouette against the stars looked more solid somehow, more permanent. Like the judge's ruling had changed it from a temporary shelter into something that could last. Eli saw to the horses while Clara went inside and got a fire started. moving through the routine tasks with muscle memory and something approaching peace. When Eli came in carrying their saddlebags, she was standing by the fireplace, just watching the flames catch and spread. He set the bags down and came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "Welcome home, Mrs. Crow." She leaned back against him, feeling the solid warmth of his chest, the steady rhythm of his breathing. "It feels different now." "How so?" "Like it's really ours, not just in practice, but in truth. Like no one can take it. No one can." He kissed the side of her neck. "But Clara, I need you to understand something. This place, this land, it's important to me. You know that. But if we'd lost today, if that judge had ruled against us, I meant what I said. I would have chosen you over the claim." She turned in his arms to face him. "You shouldn't have to choose. I know. But I would have, because the land is where I built my life. But you're the reason I want to keep living it." His hands came up to frame her face. "I love you. Not because you're useful or convenient or because you can survive out here. I love you because you're stubborn and brave and you see the world the way it is, not how you wish it was. And when I look at you, I see home. The cabin's just wood and stone." Clara felt tears burning at the corners of her eyes. "You can't just say things like that." "Why not?" "Because it makes me want to cry, and I'm tired of crying." "Then don't cry." He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, the corner of her mouth. "Laugh instead. We won, Clara. We actually won." And suddenly it hit her. The reality of it. The sheer impossible fact that they'd stood up to money and power and corruption and come out the other side intact. A laugh bubbled up, half hysteria and half pure joy. Eli grinned and picked her up, spinning her around the small cabin while she laughed and protested and clung to his shoulders. When he finally set her down, they were both breathless and grinning like fools. And then they were kissing, urgent and hungry, celebrating with their bodies what words couldn't quite capture. They made love that night with a fierce intensity that felt like reclaiming something stolen, like marking territory that was finally, legally, irrevocably theirs. Later, tangled together under blankets with the fire burning low, Clara traced patterns on Eli's chest and thought about futures, about possibilities that seemed less frightening now. "What would you think," she said slowly, "about expanding, adding a room to the cabin maybe, getting more chickens, planting a bigger garden come spring?" Eli's hand stilled where it had been stroking her hair. "You thinking long term?" "I'm thinking I want to build something that lasts. Not just survive, but actually thrive." She propped herself up on one elbow to look at him. "Is that crazy? After everything we just went through, planning like we've got all the time in the world?" "It's not crazy. It's exactly what we should be doing." He pulled her back down against him. "I've been thinking about getting another horse, maybe some cattle. The south pasture could support them if we clear some of the scrub. And we'd need a bigger barn." "We would. I could start on it this spring, soon as the ground thaws." They talked into the night, planning and dreaming, building a future with words and hope and the stubborn belief that they could make it real. It felt dangerous and wonderful at the same time, this allowing themselves to want more than mere survival. The next week settled into a rhythm that felt almost normal. Winter still held the mountains in its grip, but it felt less oppressive now. Less like a siege and more like a season they could weather together. Eli worked on plans for the barn expansion, sketching rough designs on paper Clara had brought from Silverton. She started organizing the cabin differently, making space for things they didn't have yet but might someday. A rocking chair, shelves for books, room for a child's cradle if the impossible happened. They didn't talk about the baby she'd felt growing inside her months ago, the one she'd been terrified to hope for. Didn't want to jinx it or face the fear that still lived underneath everything else. But sometimes Clara would catch Eli looking at her with a question in his eyes, and she'd just smile and change the subject. One morning in early March, Clara was hauling water from the well when she saw a rider approaching up the trail. Her first instinct was fear. Victor, come back for one more attempt. But as the figure drew closer, she recognized the Denver Land Office clerk, Samuel Wright. She set down the bucket and waited, curious and slightly wary. Wright dismounted and tipped his hat. "Mrs. Crow, hope I'm not intruding." "Not at all. What brings you all the way up here?" "Wanted to deliver something in person." He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a leather folder. "Official documentation of your claim, certified and sealed. Judge Harper wanted to make sure you had ironclad proof, just in case anyone else gets ideas. Clara took the folder with hands that shook slightly. Inside were copies of everything: the original claim, the marriage certificate, the judge's ruling, even witness testimonies from the hearing. All of it official, stamped, impossible to dispute. "Thank you," she said, her voice thick. "This means more than you know." Wright nodded. "There's something else. The investigation into that land office fire turned up some interesting things. Seems Mr. Hale had been corresponding with a clerk there, a man named Davidson. Davidson's been arrested for accepting bribes and destroying records. He's talking now, trying to reduce his sentence. Confirmed that Hale paid him to create that forged deed and then burn the evidence." Clara's breath caught. "So Victor really did set the fire?" "Not directly, but he paid for it, which is close enough. There's a warrant out for his arrest. If he ever sets foot in this territory again, he'll be taken into custody." Wright allowed himself a small smile. "Thought you'd want to know you don't have to worry about him anymore." After Wright left, Clara sat on the porch with the folder in her lap, staring at the mountains and processing everything. Victor was finished, not just defeated, criminally exposed, legally liable, his reputation destroyed. He wouldn't be coming back. Couldn't come back without facing prison. It was over, really, truly over. When Eli came back from checking the traps and she told him the news, he just nodded slowly. "Good, he earned that. Do you think he'll actually face charges? His family has money, connections. Maybe he'll buy his way out, maybe not. Either way, he's done out here." Eli sat beside her. "And I don't want to waste another breath talking about him. We've got better things to think about." "Like what?" "Like how you've been looking a little rounder around the middle lately." Clara's hand went instinctively to her stomach, which had indeed begun to swell with undeniable evidence. They'd been avoiding the subject for weeks, both too afraid to speak it into reality. But now Eli was looking at her with such hope and fear mixed together that she couldn't dodge anymore. "I didn't want to say anything," she admitted quietly. "Didn't want to get our hopes up when the doctor said—" "I don't care what the doctor said." Eli's hand covered hers on her belly. "I care what's happening right now. Are you—" "4 months, maybe, I think. It's hard to be sure, but—" She met his eyes. "I'm scared, Eli. What if he was right? What if trying to carry this baby—" "Then we'll face it together. But Clara, you're stronger than anyone gives you credit for, including yourself." His hand pressed gently against the small swell. "And if there's a baby in there, they're already a fighter, just like their mother. Or stubborn like their father." He smiled. "That too." They sat together in the morning sun, hands joined over the promise of new life. And Clara felt something shift inside her. Not the baby. That wouldn't happen for weeks yet. But something deeper. A letting go of the last fear she'd been carrying. The belief that she was too broken to have this. Too damaged to deserve it. Maybe she was broken. Maybe bringing this child into the world would be dangerous and hard, and nothing like what wealthy women in Philadelphia experienced with their doctors and nurses and easy deliveries. But she'd been doing dangerous and hard things since the day she got in that wagon, and she'd survived all of it. She could survive this too. The next months passed in a blur of preparation and cautious hope. Eli became obsessively protective, trying to keep her from lifting anything heavy or working too hard. Clara mostly ignored him and kept doing what needed doing, though she did accept his help more readily than she would have before. They told Tom Jensen when they went down for supplies, and word spread through Miller's Crossing like wildfire. The widow Patterson showed up a week later with baby clothes she'd saved from when her own children were small. The Kowalski family brought preserves and offered to help however they could. The mountain community that had stood with them in court was standing with them still, in smaller but equally important ways. And Clara realized that somewhere along the way, without even noticing, she'd found what she'd lost in Philadelphia. Not just a home, but a place where she belonged, where people knew her and chose to care anyway. Summer came early that year, the snow melting fast and flowers blooming in impossible profusion across the mountain meadows. Clara's belly grew round and full, and despite her fears, she felt stronger than she had in years. The baby moved constantly, restless and eager. Eli would put his hand on her stomach in the evenings and talk to the child growing there, telling stories about the land and the life they'd built, and the future waiting. "You think they can hear you?" Clara asked one night. "I think they can feel that they're wanted. That's what matters." She leaned into him, watching the sunset paint the valley in gold and rose. I never thought I'd have this. Any of this. Neither did I. But here we are. Here we are, she echoed, and meant it as a benediction, acclaiming of everything they'd fought for and everything still to come. When her labor started on a warm July evening, Clara was ready. Terrified, sure, but ready. The widow Patterson had moved into the cabin 3 days earlier, prepared to help with the birth. Eli paced and fretted and generally made himself useless until the widow banished him outside. The labor was long and brutal, nothing like the easy deliveries rich women supposedly had. Clara screamed and cursed and gripped the widow's hands hard enough to bruise. More than once she thought this was it. This was how the doctor's predictions would come true. She'd die bringing this child into the world, and Eli would be left alone. But she didn't die. Just after dawn, when the sky was turning that particular shade of blue-gray that meant full morning was coming, Clara felt the baby slip free in a rush of pain and relief so intense she thought she might pass out. And then there was crying, not hers, though tears were streaming down her face, but a baby's wail, furious and alive. "It's a girl," the widow said, her voice thick with emotion. A perfect, healthy girl. She placed the baby on Clara's chest, and Clara looked down at the tiny, red-faced creature who was screaming her displeasure at being born. She had dark hair plastered to her skull, and eyes that would probably be blue like Eli's, and hands that waved in the air like she was fighting invisible enemies. "She's beautiful," Clara whispered. "She's got lungs like her mother," the widow said dryly. "Now let's get you both cleaned up before we let that husband of yours in here. He's been wearing a path in the dirt." When Eli finally entered the cabin, moving like he was afraid everything might shatter, Clara was propped up in bed with their daughter sleeping against her chest. He stopped in the doorway, his face doing something complicated, joy and fear and wonder all tangled together. "Clara, we're okay, both of us. Come meet your daughter." He crossed the room like a man in a dream and sat carefully on the edge of the bed, staring at the tiny bundle. "She's so small." "She won't be for long. You should have heard her yelling earlier." Eli reached out with one finger and touched the baby's hand. Immediately, her fingers curled around his, gripping with surprising strength. He made a sound somewhere between a laugh and a sob. "What do we call her?" he asked. Clara had been thinking about this for weeks, turning over names and rejecting them all as not quite right. But looking at her daughter now, fierce even in sleep, already grabbing onto the world, she knew. "Hope. We'll call her Hope." Eli looked up, his eyes wet. "Hope Crow." "Do you like it?" "I love it. I love both of you." He leaned down and kissed Clara's forehead, then placed the gentlest kiss on Hope's downy head. "My family. My whole world in this bed. We're not going anywhere," Clara promised. And she meant it. No matter what came next, no matter what challenges the future held, they were staying. This was home. This was where they belonged. This was the life they'd chosen, the one they'd fought for, the one no amount of money could buy. Victor had been wrong about so many things, but especially this. Clara had no regrets. Not a single one. She'd traded Philadelphia's comfort for mountain winters and hard work and constant uncertainty. She'd traded society's approval for a community that valued what you did more than who you were. She'd traded a life of being useful for a life of being essential. And she'd do it again in a heartbeat. Hope turned out to be the kind of baby who demanded the world bend to her schedule, not the other way around. She woke every 2 hours through the night, hungry and vocal about it. She refused to sleep unless someone was holding her. She had colic that made her scream for hours with no apparent cause or cure. Clara spent those first weeks in a fog of exhaustion, so complete she sometimes forgot what day it was. "I don't understand," she said one morning after a particularly brutal night, rocking Hope while tears of frustration streamed down her own face. "The widow Patterson said babies sleep. Why doesn't she sleep?" Eli, who looked almost as haggard as Clara felt, took the baby gently from her arms. "Go lie down. I'll walk with her. You need rest too. I didn't just push a human being out of my body. Go, sleep." Clara was too tired to argue. She collapsed onto the bed and was unconscious within seconds, not waking until afternoon light slanted through the window. She sat up in a panic, but Eli was in the rocking chair he'd built last month, Hope asleep against his chest, both of them breathing in synchronized rhythm. Something in Clara's chest cracked open at the sight. This hard man who'd survived alone for years, who'd built a life from raw determination and calloused hands, holding their daughter like she was made of spun glass. He looked up when Clara stirred, and the exhaustion in his eyes was matched only by the fierce protectiveness there. "She finally went down about an hour ago," he whispered. "Didn't want to move and risk waking her." "You should put her in the cradle." "I'm fine." He shifted slightly, wincing. "My arm's asleep, but I'm fine." Clara crossed to them and carefully lifted Hope, who made a small noise of protest but didn't wake. She placed her in the cradle Eli had carved from pine, then turned back to find him flexing his arm and grimacing. "You're a terrible liar," she said. "I'm an excellent liar. I'm just bad at hiding things from you." He stood, joints popping. "How are you feeling?" "Like I've been trampled by horses, but better than I did this morning." She touched his face, feeling the rasp of several days' stubble. "You can't keep doing this, Eli, running yourself into the ground trying to take care of both of us. Watch me. I'm serious, we need help. At least for a few weeks until we figure out what we're doing." He was quiet for a moment, then nodded. "I'll ride down to Miller's Crossing tomorrow. See if the widow's daughter can come stay for a while. Sarah's got 4 kids of her own. She'll know what to do with a screamer." Sarah Patterson arrived 2 days later with enough practical advice and no-nonsense attitude to make Clara feel simultaneously grateful and incompetent. She took one look at how they'd been trying to manage and shook her head. "You're both doing it wrong. Baby needs routine, needs to know what's coming. Right now she's all confused because you're just reacting instead of leading." She scooped up Hope, who immediately stopped fussing. "See? Firm hands, confidence. Babies can smell fear." "She's not a wolf," Clara said. "Might as well be." Sarah settled into the rocking chair and started a rhythm that was somehow both gentle and authoritative. "Now, you're going to sleep in shifts. Clara takes night feeding, Eli handles early morning. That way you both get at least 4 hours uninterrupted. And you," she pointed at Clara, "need to eat more. You're nursing and you look half-starved." Over the next week, Sarah transformed their chaotic household into something approaching functional. She taught Clara how to read Hope's different cries, how to swaddle her tight enough to feel secure, how to get her to burp before the gas turned into hours of screaming. She taught Eli how to change diapers without looking like he was defusing a bomb, how to hold the baby while doing other tasks, how to be useful instead of just hovering. "You're both too tense," Sarah said one evening as they sat around the table for the first peaceful dinner they'd had in weeks. Hope was actually sleeping in her cradle, a minor miracle. "Babies don't need perfect. They need present. They need you to stop worrying about doing it right and just do it." "Easy for you to say," Clara muttered. "You've done this 4 times. And I was terrified the first time too, thought I'd break her every time I picked her up. But you know what I learned? Babies are tougher than they look, and so are their mothers." She looked at Clara with something like respect. "You survived childbirth that half the women in Philadelphia wouldn't have made it through. You can survive a few sleepless nights." After Sarah left, things got easier. Not easy. There was nothing easy about caring for an infant in a mountain cabin with no running water and winter coming on again. But easier. They found their rhythm, learned to work together in the small space without getting in each other's way, figured out how to be partners in this new phase of their life, the same way they'd been partners in everything else. Hope grew, slowly at first, then faster. By 6 months, she was rolling over and grabbing everything in reach. By 9 months, she was pulling herself up on furniture and babbling in strings of nonsense that almost sounded like words. She had Clara's stubborn chin and Eli's pale eyes and a personality that was entirely her own, demanding, curious, absolutely fearless. "She's going to be trouble," Eli said one afternoon, watching Hope try to climb out of her cradle for the 5th time. "She already is trouble." Clara scooped her up before she could tumble out and hurt herself, just like her parents. "We're not trouble. We're determined. That's what trouble calls itself." He grinned, and Clara was struck again by how much he'd changed in the past year. The hard edges had softened. He smiled more, laughed more, let himself be happy in ways he never had before. Fatherhood suited him in unexpected ways. But the land still demanded their attention. The barn expansion had to wait while they adjusted to life with an infant, but come spring they'd need to start if they wanted it finished before next winter, and they needed more income. Hope wouldn't stay small forever, and she'd need things they couldn't make themselves. Clothes as she grew. Eventually books, if they could get them. Maybe even schooling, though that was years away. "I've been thinking," Eli said one night after Hope was down and they were sitting by the fire, "about taking on some work for other homesteaders. Building, repairs, that kind of thing. I'm good with my hands, and people know they can trust me." Clara looked up from the sock she was darning. "You're already working yourself half to death keeping this place running." "I know, but we need money, and selling vegetables and eggs isn't going to be enough. Not if we want to expand. So we don't expand. We make do with what we have." He shook his head. "I didn't fight this hard to build something just to let it stagnate. This land can support more. We can do more. I just need to figure out how to manage the time." They talked into the night, planning and arguing and eventually finding compromise the way they always did. Eli would take on selective jobs, nothing too far from home, nothing that would keep him away for more than a few days. Clara would take over more of the land management, handling the garden and animals while he was gone. It wasn't perfect, but perfect wasn't something they'd ever aimed for anyway. The next year brought changes that rippled through their lives like stones thrown in still water. Eli's reputation as a builder spread, and he found himself with more work than he could handle. Clara's garden produced enough surplus to sell at the market in Miller's Crossing, and her preserves became popular enough that the general store started stocking them. They added 3 cows and a dozen more chickens, started clearing the south pasture for cattle. Hope learned to walk, then run, then climb everything in sight with the fearless determination of someone who'd never learned the meaning of careful. She talked constantly, asking questions about everything, demanding to know why and how and what for. She was exhausting and brilliant and absolutely impossible, and they loved her with an intensity that sometimes scared Clara. "What if something happens to her?" she asked Eli one night after Hope had fallen asleep between them, her small body warm and solid. "Like what?" "I don't know. Illness? Accident? This life is dangerous, Eli. We're miles from any doctor. If she got sick, then we deal with it. Same way we deal with everything else." He stroked Hope's hair gently. "You can't protect her from the world, Clara. All you can do is teach her how to face it. She's 2 years old, and already tougher than most adults I know. She'll be fine." Clara wanted to believe that. Tried to hold on to it when Hope got her first fever, and Clara spent 3 days barely sleeping, watching her daughter's small chest rise and fall, terrified each breath might be the last. But Hope recovered, bouncing back with the resilience of youth, and Clara learned something she should have known already. Fear would be part of this now, forever. Loving someone this much meant living with the constant knowledge that you could lose them, but it also meant moments of joy so pure they hurt. Hope's first word, which was "da," and made Eli cry, though he denied it. Her first full sentence demanding more cake at her second birthday celebration. The way she'd throw her arms around Clara's neck and say, "Love you, Mama," with such fierce conviction it felt like a vow. When Hope was 3, Clara found herself pregnant again. This time there was less fear, though it never fully disappeared. Her body had proven it could do this once. Maybe it could do it again. The pregnancy was harder than the first, complications that kept her bedridden for the last 2 months. Eli hired Sarah Patterson to come stay again, and Hope was convinced her mother was dying. "You're not going to die, are you, Mama?" she asked every night before bed. "No, sweetheart. I'm just growing you a brother or sister." "I don't want a brother or sister. I want you." Clara pulled her close, breathing in the little girl's smell of her hair. "You'll always have me, always." The baby came early. A boy this time, smaller than Hope had been, but with lungs just as powerful. They named him Thomas, after Eli's father, and he fit into their lives with surprising ease. Hope was suspicious at first, viewing him as competition for attention, but after a few weeks she declared him my baby and appointed herself his fierce protector. The years blurred together after that, a cascade of moments that felt both endless and fleeting. Another pregnancy, another daughter, Grace, born on a spring morning so beautiful it felt like a gift. The completion of the barn expansion, a drought that tested everything they'd built. A winter so brutal they lost half their chickens and thought they might not make it themselves. But they always made it, always found a way through. Because that's what they'd learned to do, Clara and Eli. Survive first, then build. Take what the world threw at them and refuse to break. Hope turned 7, then 10, then 12. She learned to ride and shoot and track. She could read better than most adults in Miller's Crossing because Clara had taught her with the books they'd slowly accumulated. She had her mother's stubbornness and her father's quiet intensity and absolutely no patience for things she considered stupid, which was most things. Thomas was different, gentler, more interested in growing things than building them. He spent hours in the garden with Clara, learning the names of plants and how to coax life from soil. He had Eli's pale eyes but Clara's dark hair, and a thoughtfulness that sometimes made him seem older than his years. Grace was the wild one. She'd climb anything, chase anything, fight with her siblings, and then defend them ferociously against outsiders. She looked like Hope, but acted like neither parent, charting her own course through the world with absolute confidence. "Where do they get it from?" Clara asked Eli one evening, watching their 3 children argue about whose turn it was to feed the chickens. "This certainty that the world belongs to them?" "From us," Eli said simply. "We taught them they could fight for what's theirs. Shouldn't be surprised when they do." They were standing on the porch of a cabin that had grown over the years. 2 rooms added, a real second floor, windows with actual glass. The land around them had changed too. Cleared fields, sturdy fences, a garden that produced enough to feed them and sell. Cattle grazing in the south pasture, chickens scratching in their yard. The barn Eli had built standing solid and proud. It was a homestead now. A real one. The kind that would last. Clara was 43 years old and her body showed the years. Her hands were rough and scarred. Her face had lines the Philadelphia women she'd known would have considered tragic. Her hair was starting to gray at the temples. She was nothing like the woman who'd stepped off that wagon at Miller's Crossing 15 years ago. That woman had been soft and uncertain and trying desperately to disappear. This woman was neither soft nor uncertain. This woman had birthed 3 children against medical advice, had survived winters that would have killed someone weaker, had stood in a courtroom and defended her right to exist on her own terms, had built a life from nothing but determination and love and the refusal to accept what others said was impossible. "Do you ever regret it?" Eli asked, like he'd read her thoughts. "Any of it?" Clara looked at their children, at the land they'd claimed, at the mountain standing eternal watch over it all. "Not even once." "Not even the hard parts?" "Especially not the hard parts. Those are what taught us who we are." He pulled her close, and they stood there watching the sun set over the valley they'd made their own. In the distance, Clara could see smoke rising from other homesteads. Miller's Crossing had grown too, more families, more buildings, the beginnings of what might someday be a real town. Their community, the one that had stood with them when it mattered. Hope came to the door holding Grace's hand. "Mama, Grace won't admit I won the race." "That's because you cheated," Grace protested. "Did not." "Did too." "Girls," Clara said firmly, "inside, set the table for dinner." They went, still arguing, and Thomas slipped past them looking relieved to escape the conflict. Eli chuckled. "Never a quiet moment. Would you want one?" "Absolutely not." They went inside to chaos. Grace and Hope still bickering, Thomas trying to mediate, the whole cabin alive with noise and motion, and the particular chaos of a family that loved each other even while driving each other crazy. Clara moved through it with practiced ease, serving stew she'd made that morning, settling arguments, making sure everyone ate. After dinner, after the dishes were washed and the children were in bed, and the cabin was finally quiet, Claire sat down with the ledger she kept of their finances. They were doing well. Better than well. Between Eli's building work and her preserves and the produce they sold, they'd managed to save almost $300. It wasn't a fortune, but it was security. The kind that meant a bad harvest wouldn't destroy them. The kind that meant they could think about the future without fear. "What are you thinking?" Eli asked, coming to sit beside her. "That we did it. Actually did it. Built something real." "We did." He took her hand, his thumb tracing the calluses on her palm. "And it's not finished. Hope's talking about wanting to learn carpentry. Thomas wants to try growing wheat next year. Grace—" He shook his head. "Grace wants to learn everything. She asked me yesterday if I could teach her to shoot like a man." Clara laughed. "What did you tell her?" "That I'd teach her to shoot better than a man. If she's going to do something, might as well do it right." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the kind that came from years of knowing each other so well, words weren't always necessary. But Clara had something she needed to say, something that had been building in her chest for weeks. "I heard from Philadelphia," she said quietly. Eli went still. What? My sister wrote. First letter I've gotten from anyone back there since I left. She pulled the envelope from her pocket. My father died 3 months ago. Heart gave out. She thought I'd want to know. Do you? Clara thought about it. Thought about the man who'd looked at her like she was broken, who'd let Victor Hale humiliate her publicly, who'd made it clear she was a disappointment. I thought I'd feel something. Relief, maybe, or grief. But I just feel nothing. He stopped being my father the day he decided I wasn't worth defending. I'm sorry. Don't be. He made his choice. I made mine, and I got the better deal. She looked at Eli. The letter said he left me nothing in his will. Everything went to my sister and her husband. She wanted to apologize, like I'd be upset about it. Are you? No, everything I need is right here. She folded the letter and set it aside. I thought about writing back, telling her about our life, about the children, about how I'm happier now than I ever was in that house. But what's the point? She wouldn't understand. None of them would. Their loss. Exactly. Clara leaned into him. Do you know what the real victory is? Not that we won in court, or that we built this place, or even that I survived childbirth 3 times when everyone said I couldn't. The real victory is that I don't need their approval anymore. I don't need them to understand or accept or validate my choices. I just need this. You, the kids. This life we built from nothing. Eli kissed the top of her head. You're remarkable. You know that? I'm stubborn. That too. They went to bed eventually, climbing the stairs to the room they'd added 5 years ago. A real bedroom with a door that closed, giving them privacy they'd never had in the early days. Clara lay in the darkness, listening to the sounds of the house settling, the whisper of wind through the pines outside, the distant call of an owl hunting. This was home, not because it was comfortable or easy or anything like what she'd imagined her life would be, but because it was theirs. Built with their hands and defended with their courage and filled with love that was messy and imperfect and absolutely real. The years continued their relentless march. Hope turned 15 and announced she wanted to apprentice with her father, learning the building trade properly. Thomas was 12 and had turned their garden into something approaching a small farm, experimenting with crops no one else in the territory had tried. Grace was 10 and had decided she wanted to be a surveyor, though no one was quite sure where she'd gotten that idea. They're going to leave eventually, Clara said one night. Build their own lives. I know. How do we let them go after fighting so hard to keep them safe? Eli was quiet for a long moment. We let them go because keeping them safe was never about holding them here. It was about teaching them how to survive out there. And we did that. Look at them, Clara. They're ready. She wanted to argue, wanted to say they were still too young, still needed their parents. But she'd been 16 when she got engaged to Victor, 17 when the diagnosis came, 18 when she ran west. Her children, raised with freedom and competence and the absolute certainty that they could do hard things, were more prepared than she'd ever been. I'm not ready, she admitted. Neither am I. But we'll manage, same way we always do. Hope left first, at 17, to apprentice with a master builder in Denver. It was the opportunity of a lifetime, and they couldn't say no, even though Clara cried for 3 days after she left. But Hope wrote letters every week, full of details about what she was learning and the buildings she was helping construct, and how someday she'd come back and build them a house that would last 100 years. Thomas stayed longer, working the land until he was 20, then announced he'd been offered a position with the Territorial Agricultural Office, studying drought-resistant crops. He'd be traveling, but coming home between assignments. Clara hugged him tight and told him to be careful, and slipped an extra $50 into his bag when he wasn't looking. Grace was the surprise. At 18, she declared she was staying, at least for now. Someone needs to keep this place running while you two get old and useless, she said with the complete lack of tact that characterized everything she did. We're not old, Eli protested. You're 52, Da. That's old. Clara, who was 50 at that point, chose not to comment. Instead, she watched Grace take over more of the daily operations with a competence that was humbling. Their youngest daughter had inherited the best of both of them, Eli's practical skill and Clara's fierce determination, and added her own gift for seeing 3 steps ahead. The homestead thrived under Grace's management. She expanded the cattle operation, negotiated better prices for their goods, even convinced the Territorial Land Office to grant them additional acreage. By the time she was 25, she'd built the place into something that could support 2 families comfortably, which was good because hope came back. She arrived one spring morning with a husband, a quiet man named James who knew his way around a workshop, and announced they were building a house on the north section of the property. "If that's all right," she added belatedly. "Of course it's all right," Clara said, pulling her daughter into a fierce hug. "Welcome home." They built that house together, 3 generations working side by side. Eli and James handled the heavy carpentry. Hope designed and directed with the confidence of someone who'd learned from the best. Grace managed logistics. Clara fed everyone and watched her family grow with a heart so full it hurt. Thomas came home for the house raising, bringing a wife of his own, a woman from Denver who looked terrified of the wilderness until Grace took her in hand and taught her the basics of survival. They were expecting their first child, which meant Clara was going to be a grandmother at 53. The night before Thomas had to leave again, they all gathered around the table in the original cabin, which seemed impossibly small now with so many people crammed inside. Grace had made her famous stew. Hope's husband had brought whiskey from Denver. Everyone was talking over each other, laughing, arguing about everything and nothing. Clara looked around at the faces she loved. Eli, silver-haired now but still strong. Hope, grown into a woman who could build anything she imagined. Thomas, brilliant and kind. Grace, fierce and capable. The spouses who'd married into this chaos. And soon, grandchildren who would carry this legacy forward. "What are you thinking?" Eli asked quietly, though he probably knew. "That we won," Clara said. "Not just survived. Actually won. We did." He took her hand. Against every odd, every doubt, every person who said we couldn't. The conversation swirled around them, but Clara was somewhere else. She was remembering a younger version of herself, standing at a wagon station with nothing but a contract and desperation. Remembering the fear and uncertainty and the terrible certainty that she was making a mistake. She'd been wrong about that. This hadn't been a mistake. It had been the first real choice she'd ever made. The first time she'd chosen something for herself. Not because it was expected or safe or what others wanted for her. And everything that came after, the struggle and the triumph, the fear and the joy, the building of a life from raw land and stubborn will, all of it grew from that one decision. To choose the unknown over the comfortable. To choose partnership over security. To choose herself. Later, after everyone had gone to their own homes and the cabin was quiet again, Clara and Eli sat on the porch watching stars emerge in the darkening sky. The mountains stood black against the deep blue, eternal and unchanging. But everything else had changed, was still changing. "Do you think we did right by them?" Clara asked. "The children? I think we did the best we could, taught them to be strong and independent and not to take anyone's word for what they could or couldn't do." Eli squeezed her hand. "They're good people, Clara, better than we had any right to hope for. They're amazing people, and I take no credit for that." "Liar. You take half the credit, I take the other half." She laughed and leaned against him, feeling the solid warmth of his shoulder. They'd grown old together, she realized. Not in the tragic way Philadelphia matrons feared, desperately trying to hold back time, but in the way of trees growing together, roots entwined so deeply it was impossible to say where one ended and the other began. "I love you," she said. "I don't say it enough, but I do. More than I thought it was possible to love anything." "I know. I love you too." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars multiplied overhead, and Clara thought about legacy. Not the kind measured in money or status or the things Philadelphia valued, but the kind measured in children who knew their worth. In land that would feed families for generations. In a community built on mutual respect rather than social hierarchy. In the proof that 2 people with nothing but determination could build something that would outlast them both. Victor had offered her comfort and safety, and a life where everything was decided for her. She'd chosen uncertainty instead, chosen the hard work of building rather than the ease of accepting what was given. And she'd discovered something he would never understand. Comfort wasn't the same as happiness. Safety wasn't the same as freedom. And a life without the power to choose your own path wasn't really living at all. The wind shifted, bringing the scent of pine and snow from the high peaks. Clara breathed it in and felt at peace in a way she never had in all those Philadelphia years. This was where she belonged. Not because it was easy or convenient, but because she'd chosen it, had fought for it, had built it with her own hands and defended it with everything she had. And that made all the difference. Eli's hand tightened on hers, and she knew he was thinking similar thoughts. They'd come from such different places. She from wealth and privilege that had proven hollow, he from poverty that had taught him the value of what you could build yourself. But they'd met in the middle, in this mountain wilderness, and made something neither could have imagined alone. That was the real magic of it. Not that they'd survived, though that was remarkable enough, but that they'd created something bigger than themselves. A family, a home, a legacy that would ripple forward through generations, teaching their children's children that you didn't have to accept the life others planned for you, that you could choose differently, choose harder, choose yourself. The stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns. And Clara Crow, who had been Clara Whitlock, who had been lost and found and broken and rebuilt, sat with her husband in the home they'd made and knew with absolute certainty that she wouldn't change a single thing. Not the fear or the struggle, not the pain or the doubt, not even the moments when she'd thought this life might break her. Because all of it, every difficult step, had led her here. To this porch, this man, this life that was imperfect and challenging and absolutely, completely hers. And that was worth more than all the comfort in Philadelphia could ever buy.